the last empire of the Chinese continent, the Qing Dynasty, once reigned as the world's leading economic powerhouse. However, after being severely defeated by Western powers and repeated internal strife, it began its descent into decline. At the heart of this decline was Empress Dowager Cixi, notorious as one of history's greatest villains. She was the supreme ruler above the emperor and was also at the center of jaw-dropping scandals. After the death of Cixi, the people cursed her for the nation's downfall due to her extravagance. Rumors had it that Cixi summoned beautiful young men to the Imperial garden nightly and had them killed the next day to prevent any secrets from leaking. It was also rumored that she coerced her daughter-in-law, the Empress, into taking her own life. Did Empress Dowager Cixi's numerous scandals truly lead to the Qing Dynasty's downfall? Let's delve into the shocking story of Cixi, a problematic figure of the Qing Dynasty. The Qing Dynasty in the 19th century was precarious. The Opium Wars with Britain plunged the Qing Dynasty into tremendous war debt, and the people suffered from unbearable taxes and devastating famine. Eventually, a man named Hong Xiuquan started a rebellion proclaiming the establishment of the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom. This was the largest rebellion in the history of central China, known as the Taiping Rebellion. During this tumultuous period, the newly enthroned figure was the 20-year-old Emperor Xianfeng. Emperor Xianfeng was without an empress as his first wife had died before his accession. Among the women selected as concubines at that time was the 16-year-old Cixi. Let's clarify that Cixi is not her real name, nor is it her family name. Her formal title was Empress Dowager Cixi and, among others. Despite her infamy, little is known about Cixi's real name or origins. Her given name was Lanner and she was of Manchu nobility, but this is not certain. The most widely known fact is that she was the daughter of a lower-ranking king official. Therefore, her ambition and desire for power were unusually strong. Concubines in the Qing Dynasty received distinctly different treatment based on their rank, from their clothing to their food. Cixi, as a concubine, was not satisfied with her position. Concubines were ranked below the empress in 7 distinct tiers. Initially, Cixi was of the 5th rank, a noble lady. However, another concubine who entered the palace with her ascended from the 4th rank to become the empress in just 40 days. Feeling deeply insulted being ranked lower than her palace peers, Cixi began to make relentless efforts to gain the emperor's favor. She even went as far as releasing a cat in the emperor's path and pretended to cry while searching for it, or sang in a deliberately sweet voice to attract his attention. Thanks to her persistent efforts, Cixi eventually succeeded in becoming intimate with the emperor and, 4 years later, in 1856, she gave birth to a son, having borne the emperor's first son, a status not even the empress had achieved. This was a life-changing accomplishment for Cixi. At the age of 20, she now wielded influence second only to the empress. Folk tales say that after giving birth to the prince, Cixi received the emperor's favor and began to participate in politics from this point. Her ability to read and write played a favorable role for her. At that time, punctuation marks like commas or periods were not used, making reading more challenging than today. And women did not take civil exams or participate in politics. Most women did not receive a proper education and were rarely literate. Even the empress could neither read nor write. Cixi's expansion of power, Cixi's real display of her thirst for power came during the Second Opium War, which changed the fate of the Qing Dynasty. Britain, which had humiliated the Qing Dynasty during the First Opium War, had already signed the unequal Treaty of Nanjing. The Second Opium War was instigated to further exploit the Qing Dynasty. As a result of the Second Opium War, the Treaty of Tianjin was agreed upon, which was highly unsatisfactory from the Qing perspective. When the Qing did not comply with the treaty, the British and French allies pushed into Beijing. Panicked, Emperor Xianfeng fled beyond the Great Wall to a remote palace in Ri, taking Cixi, the prince, and other concubines with him. Upon learning that the emperor had fled, the allied forces of Britain and France set fire to the famously beautiful Imperial garden, the Old Summer Palace. In the emperor's absence, Beijing was on the verge of being taken. During this critical time, the task of managing the war was left to the emperor's half-brother, Prince Gong, who stayed behind in the Forbidden City. Prince Gong, unlike his timid half-brother Emperor Xianfeng, had a vibrant character and maintained active relations with Westerners. Prince Gong took charge of diplomacy on behalf of his brother, and thus in 1860, the war concluded with the Beijing Treaty. A particularly devastating aspect of the Beijing Treaty was the loss of land. Not only had the king lost Hong Kong Island to Britain during the First Opium War, but now they also had to cede the Kowloon Peninsula across from Hong Kong Island. This Hong Kong Island and Kowloon Peninsula would eventually develop into today's Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Not only Hong Kong but also the land of Primorsky Krai had to be handed over to Russia. After two Opium Wars, the Western powers thoroughly subdued the Qing Dynasty. The long-held belief in the centrality of China began to crumble in the face of European imperialism. Meanwhile, Prince Gong, having managed the situation, contacted his brother Emperor Zhongfeng, who was in hiding in Ri, to come back. Emperor Zhongfeng, possibly resentful of seeing Prince Gong, refused to return, wallowing in self-pity. Eventually, shortly after, Emperor Xianfeng died in Ri in 1861 at the age of 30, and Cixi, now a widow, was only 25 years old. Following Emperor Zhongfeng, the throne was inherited by his only son and Cixi's pride, the 10-year-old Emperor Tongzhi. But Emperor Tongzhi was only 5 years old at the time. Cixi began to fully reveal her ambitions. As the mother of the emperor, even before his death, Emperor Xianfeng was concerned about his young son. He worried that such a young boy couldn't properly handle the affairs of state, so he appointed 8 ministers to assist the boy until he came of age. Moreover, to prevent these 8 ministers from monopolizing power, he devised a safeguard. He split the imperial seal, giving one part to Tongzhi and another to Empress Dowager Cixi. When the 8 ministers issued orders, they had to include both Tongzhi's and Empress Dowager Xian's seals for the documents to be recognized. Though Emperor Zhongfeng had well prepared the ground for a balance of power, the seal of young Emperor Tongzhi was effectively controlled by his mother Cixi. Annoyed by the 8 ministers, Cixi sought to fortify her position with strong allies. Those turned out to be her husband's half-brother, Prince Gong, and Empress Dowager Cixi. But would Empress Dowager Cixi, who had been Cixi's rival, have easily joined hands with her? Yes, she did. From Empress Dowager Cixi's perspective, the situation was understandable. Her husband Emperor Zhongfeng was dead, and the new Emperor Tongzhi wasn't her son. Moreover, as the Qing Dynasty didn't have strong external family influences, Empress Dowager Cixi had no such external support. If the power of the 8 ministers became too strong, Empress Dowager Cixi's position would have weakened considerably. Prince Gong also considered the possibility of the 8 ministers obstructing his future. These 3 people joined hands and carry out a palace coup. The Xinyu coup occurred in 1861. Following this coup, the 8 ministers were either executed for treason or sent into exile. After this, Emperor Tongzhi ascended the throne, with Cixi, Empress Dowager Cixi, and Prince Gong solidifying their power. Instead of young Emperor Tongzhi, Cixi and Empress Dowager Cixi began co-regency. The 2 Empress Dowagers would stand behind a yellow curtain at the emperor's chair and discuss state affairs with ministers, their faces hidden. Though it was called a joint regency, in reality, Cixi handled almost all the affairs since Empress Dowager Xian was illiterate and unfamiliar with statecraft. Prince Gong, part of the coup, received the title of Prince Regent. A Prince Regent, simply speaking, was a king who discusses state affairs. Specifically, he chaired meetings with ministers and relayed messages to the Empress Dowagers for the emperor. With power in his hands, Prince Gong also initiated military reforms step by step and sent students abroad to cultivate talented individuals. He also established Tongwen Guan, an institution for foreign language education focused on Western language. As 3 individuals seized power, a wind of change blew through the Qing Dynasty. The most significant change occurred when Britain decided to support the Qing Imperial Court, suppressing the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom that had threatened the Qing Imperial Court for 14 years. Though a brief period of peace seemed imminent in the Qing Dynasty, Empress Dowager Cixi grew increasingly annoyed by Prince Gong, who wielded power under the guise of managing state affairs. Shortly thereafter, she dismissed Prince Gong using her son, the emperor's, authority. Realizing his precarious situation, Prince Gong prostrated himself before Empress Dowager Cixi, begging for forgiveness while weeping profusely, supported by the bureaucrats around him. If Prince Gong, who handled practical affairs, were absent, state affairs would not run smoothly, and his connections with Westerners were essential for adopting new technologies and communication. Ultimately, Empress Dowager Cixi only stripped him of his royal title but ensured he retained a minimum official position. Thus, Empress Dowager Cixi firmly held Prince Gong's fate in her hands. At this time, she was nearly 30 years old. Empress Dowager Cixi then initiated substantial reforms using Prince Gong. During this period, Prince Gong embraced Western technologies and ideas, advocating for modernization and strengthening the nation, known as the self-strengthening movement. Particularly, the Qing Dynasty focused on naval power during the self-strengthening movement, due to the bitter experiences of defeats against Western powers across the seas. In 1871, to properly counter Western forces, 4 modern fleets were established: the Bang Fleet, Nanyang Fleet, Fujian Fleet, and Guangdong Fleet. Among them, the Bang Fleet's vessels Xinyuan and Dingguan were the most powerful. Similar in appearance to the current fleet, they were ironclads made by Germany, then closely following the powerful British Navy. While the Qing Dynasty solidified its foundations, Empress Dowager Cixi completely dominated the imperial palace. She would never tolerate her appearance being less than perfect. It was not merely for vanity, but for the visible authority it commanded. For example, she started her day washing her face with a cosmetic made from bird droppings called jade bath powder. After washing, a young eunuch with slender hands would use a 6 centimeters jade roller to roll her face about 50 times like kneading dough. Then she would apply various cosmetics and finish with powder and rouge made from red roses. To enhance her beauty, she also consumed pearl powder, and the millstone used to grind the pearls still exists. Occasionally, she mixed lard with egg whites for a full body massage. In her later years, Empress Dowager Cixi famously drank colostrum directly from newly delivered mothers, after making them kneel blindfolded. The ultimate power holder of the Qing Dynasty, indulging in all kinds of luxuries, lacked one thing: a toilet. There were no toilets in the Forbidden City. Young eunuchs had to carry and clean the chamber pots used by the emperor, empress dowagers, empresses, and concubines daily. The palace maids would sprinkle water on white paper and iron it to make toilet paper. The chamber pots used by the royalty, known as guanfang, were intricately made of silver, true works of art. The most shocking deeds of Empress Dowager Cixi will be covered later, but every time a scandal involving a Peking opera actor or a political issue related to the Empress occurred, it was Empress Dowager Dong who managed to restrain Empress Dowager Cixi. Empress Dowager Cixi would have wanted to kill the bothersome Empress Dowager Dong right away. According to folklore, Empress Dowager Dong had one weapon, an edict left by the previous emperor stating, "If Empress Dowager Cixi trusts her son and wields power, she may be killed." As long as Empress Dowager Dong held that edict, Empress Dowager Cixi had to be cautious. One day, upon hearing that Empress Dowager Dong was severely ill, Empress Dowager Cixi, sensing an opportunity, wounded herself and offered her blood and medicine to Empress Dowager Dong. Deeply moved by Empress Dowager Cixi's gesture, Empress Dowager Dong eventually burned the threatening edict. Although it's rare to find exact events confirming the conflict between the two Empress Dowagers, subtle friction was evident when Emperor Tongzhi chose his Empress, influenced by both. For Empress Dowager Cixi, choosing the Empress was not merely about selecting a daughter-in-law. It was crucial that Emperor Tongzhi, once he came of age and began ruling, had a supportive Empress by his side. However, Emperor Tongzhi favored his kind stepmother, Empress Dowager Dong, over his birth mother, Empress Dowager Cixi, even ignoring Cixi's wishes and welcoming the candidate Dong recommended as Empress. The new Empress was Empress Cixi, a granddaughter of one of the 8 ministers executed during the Xinyu coup. Deeply hurt, Empress Dowager Cixi began to interfere in the relationship between her son and his wife. Emperor Tongzhi genuinely loved his wife, Empress Cixi, and wished to be with her, but Empress Dowager Cixi, citing his studies, prevented their conjugal visits. Reduced to a puppet by Empress Dowager Cixi, Emperor Tongzhi felt powerless as she even controlled his marital relations. According to folklore, eunuchs, trying to console Emperor Tongzhi, took him to brothels, and he quickly fell into debauchery. Tragically, Emperor Tongzhi died at the age of 18, less than 3 years after his marriage. Given Emperor Tongzhi's frequent visits to brothels, rumors circulated that he died of syphilis. The records of the Qing Palace, documenting common gossip, mention that he contracted syphilis, and records by Emperor Tongzhi's tutor, Wuntongyi also suggests symptoms consistent with syphilis. However, official imperial records and the royal physician's prescriptions list smallpox as the cause of death. When Emperor Tongzhi fell ill, Empress Dowager Cixi blamed the Empress, leading to public censure. Eventually, Empress Cixi took her own life less than a year after Emperor Tongzhi's death. Folklore provides a shocking account. Empress Cixi was pregnant with Emperor Tongzhi's child, and fearing the end of her regency if the child were born, Empress Dowager Cixi coerced the Empress into suicide. Nonetheless, after sending off her son and daughter-in-law, Empress Dowager Cixi, still only 39, had no intention of relinquishing power. Thus, when Emperor Tongzhi died suddenly, leaving everyone in shock, Empress Dowager Cixi promptly placed his young cousin, Emperor Guangxu, on the throne as a puppet emperor. At that time, Emperor Guangxu was merely 3 years old, and Empress Dowager Cixi continued as regent. Empress Dowager Cixi harshly reprimanded and disciplined Emperor Guangxu, always finding his presence in front of her unsatisfactory. Additionally, Empress Dowager Dong suddenly died when Emperor Guangxu was 9 years old. With her passing, there was no one left to warmly comfort or control Empress Dowager Cixi in the palace. Rumors suggest that Empress Dowager Cixi poisoned Empress Dowager Dong with rice cakes laced with poison. By the time Emperor Guangxu turned 16, he could no longer tolerate Empress Dowager Cixi's interference. According to imperial law, the emperor was to choose an empress and begin ruling independently at 16. Empress Dowager Cixi, unwilling to relinquish power, continually delayed the selection of Emperor Guangxu's empress. Eventually, without marrying, Emperor Guangxu turned 17. Overwhelmed by frustration and anger, he caused a disturbance. Ultimately, Empress Dowager Cixi had no choice but to set a date for a grand wedding, declaring she would withdraw from regency once the emperor was married. However, Empress Dowager Cixi was not one to easily relinquish power. Already addicted to the taste of formidable authority, she ensured that major decisions still required her approval, regardless of the emperor's wishes, and installed her niece, Empress Longyu, as the new empress against the emperor's desires. Emperor Guangxu showed little affection for an empress he never wanted. Nevertheless, in 1889, Emperor Guangxu married and was recognized as an adult, signaling the end of Empress Dowager Cixi's regency. What did she do next? Empress Dowager Cixi's truly notorious acts of cruelty began around this time. Having stepped back from the Forbidden City, Empress Dowager Cixi moved to the Summer Palace. She restored the Imperial Garden, the Summer Palace, which had been destroyed during the war. The Summer Palace was transformed into a lavish kingdom solely for Empress Dowager Cixi. At the time, the Qing Dynasty was repaying war indemnities to Britain and France. The construction of the Summer Palace alone consumed 10% of the Qing Dynasty's annual budget. The critical funds meant for military expenditures were used instead to build a playground for her personal indulgence, earning her severe criticism. The size of the Summer Palace was huge. Empress Dowager Cixi had young men summoned to her bedroom in the Summer Palace to serve her, and by morning, these men would vanish like mirages, rumored to be killed by her the next day to prevent any secrets from leaking. The extravagance for just one person, Empress Dowager Cixi, was enormous. On screen, Empress Dowager Cixi's fingernails are adorned with hoof covers, expensive ornaments worn to prevent her nails from breaking. It seems impractical to wear such things, but they were commonly used by the highest echelons of imperial women who had no need to use their own hands. Empress Dowager Cixi's high-quality white silk socks were embroidered stitch by craftsmen, taking so long to make one pair that she never wore the same pair twice. Hence, the cost of making Empress Dowager Cixi's socks was equivalent to a year's salary for royalty. Empress Dowager Cixi wore expensive silk dresses gilded with gold, draped with a cape made from over 300 pearls. She owned over 3,000 dresses and changed her outfits several times a day. It's said that over 700 boxes of Empress Dowager Cixi's clothes were found, testament to the extreme level of her extravagance. Moreover, she enjoyed the scent of fresh fruit so much that she used jars of it like diffusers, requiring eunuchs to replace the apples in the jars several times a day, necessitating a tremendous amount of apples. Not only did she cherish the scent of fruits, but she also favored gemstones shaped like fruits. The gems visible in the current photo are carved into shapes of watermelon, cabbage, and dongpo pork. Among them, the emerald jade watermelon was her favorite jewel, worth 5 million taels of silver. She placed this jewel in her most secure cabinet and locked it with a mechanical lock, ordering the eunuchs to guard it day and night. Especially, Empress Dowager Cixi's appetite was enormous, and her meals consisted of over 120 different dishes. The cost of one meal for her was equivalent to a year's worth of food for an average citizen of the Qing Dynasty. There was a reason for this extravagance: to prevent potential poisoning. No one could know which dish she preferred. Thus, Empress Dowager Cixi avoided eating the same dish more than 3 times. Although she frequently enjoyed meats like duck, pork, and chicken because she loved them so much, she also frequently consumed high-quality shark fin, a staple of luxury Chinese cuisine, which was not commonly eaten by emperors before her. Ironically, thanks to Empress Dowager Cixi's lavishness at the table, Chinese cuisine advanced significantly. As Empress Dowager Cixi indulged in the ultimate luxury at the Summer Palace, a major event occurred. In July 1894, Japanese forces invaded Gyeongbokgung Palace in Korea, seizing control of the Joseon court and marking the official start of the First Sino-Japanese War. The Qing Dynasty suffered defeats in the Battle of Pengdo, the Battle of Pyongyang, and the Battle of the Yellow Sea. Although the proud Bang fleet was decimated in just 3 hours, not a single Japanese warship sank. News of the Bang fleet's devastating loss prompted Li Hongzhang to express his frustration in writing. The inability of the Qing Dynasty to expand its fleet with modern warships had its reasons. The deepening crisis of the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 coincided with Empress Dowager Cixi's 60th birthday celebration. The projected cost for Empress Dowager Cixi's birthday festivities the year before the war broke out was estimated at approximately 36 million taels. At the time, the annual budget of the Qing Dynasty was roughly 80 to 90 million taels. At least a third of the annual budget was allocated for Empress Dowager Cixi's birthday expenses, with the military budget leaking into Empress Dowager Cixi's birthday expenses. The Qing Dynasty's defeat was perhaps inevitable. On April 17, 1895, the Treaty of Shimonoseki concluded the First Sino-Japanese War, and the defeated king had to pay Japan an amount 3 times their annual budget. The Qing Dynasty's finances were nearly bankrupt. In an era devoid of modern financial systems, it was forced to borrow money at high interest rates from Western powers. But the story didn't end there. Japan, along with Britain, Russia, and Germany, jumped into the competition for rights in China, leading to the gradual usurpation of Qing territory. In response, Chinese intellectuals advocated for sweeping reforms to save the nation, and Emperor Guangxu embraced these, leading to the 100 Days Reform. Empress Dowager Cixi sought to depose Emperor Guangxu and resume direct regency. Although she couldn't dethrone him, she confined Emperor Guangxu within the Forbidden City. The confinement of Emperor Guangxu became a pretext for Empress Dowager Cixi to expel the unyielding Western powers. To achieve this, she eventually enlisted the Boxer Rebellion, a civilian religious movement. The Boxer Rebellion shared Empress Dowager Cixi's disdain for the West. The Boxers were mostly peasants who had lost their livelihoods, and their anger was directed at Westerners. Thus, the Boxers shouted themselves hoarse, advocating the destruction of the West to aid the Qing Dynasty. Eventually, over 200,000 Boxers stormed into Beijing and began slaughtering Westerners indiscriminately. As Empress Dowager Cixi showed leniency towards the Boxers, the Western powers, unable to remain passive, organized an allied force. Adding insult to injury, the German envoy was murdered by the Boxers, prompting the Western allied forces to march into Beijing to suppress the Boxers. Overwhelmed by the overwhelming force of the Allies, Empress Dowager Cixi fled Beijing with Emperor Guangxu and sought refuge in Zion. Ultimately, on September 7, 1901, the war ended with the signing of the Boxer Protocol. The Boxer Protocol was a devastating blow, completely crippling the Qing Dynasty. Only after the Allied forces secured compensation amounting to 5 years' budget did they withdraw. At that time, the Allied forces insisted on punishing all those responsible for the Boxer Rebellion, but Empress Dowager Cixi, the main instigator, managed to slip away and safely returned to Beijing. Even in her old age, Empress Dowager Cixi remained deeply immersed in luxury and power lust. In 1904, she even took a photograph emulating Queen Victoria of the United Kingdom. By now, Empress Dowager Cixi had surpassed her 70s. After several wars, foreign invasions, and internal rebellions, the nation's fortunes wavered. During this period, Emperor Guangxu, like a mere puppet, barely managed to cling to life. ultimately dying in 1908. At the time, rumors followed that Emperor Guangxu had been poisoned by Empress Dowager Cixi, and in 2008, high levels of arsenic were discovered in Emperor Guangxu's hair, confirming that he died from poisoning before Emperor Guangxu's death had already prepared a 3-year-old emperor to succeed him. That was Poi, the last emperor of the Qing Dynasty. However, Empress Dowager Cixi did not live to see Emperor Pui's ascension. She died the day after Emperor Guangxu's death. With the disappearance of the formidable axis of power that was Empress Dowager Cixi, the Qing Dynasty began to rapidly disintegrate. Soon, calls to overthrow the inept Qing Imperial family and establish a new country surged. And just 3 years after Empress Dowager Cixi's death, the Xinei Revolution broke out, leading to the fall of the Qing Dynasty. Empress Dowager Cixi's extravagance continued even after her death. It is said that her funeral cost was 3 times more than that of Emperor Guangxu. Empress Dowager Cixi wielded power during a period marked by Western aggression and civil unrest, leading to the fragmentation of the nation. Yet, she maintained her position at the pinnacle of power for a long time. She laid the foundations for a modern state and supported the self-strengthening movement to stabilize the country. Clearly, she was a politically astute figure, and it would be unfair to blame her entirely for the fall of the Qing Dynasty. However, Empress Dowager Cixi is eternally reviled not just because she placed her interests and power lust above the nation, but because her actions directly led to the complete downfall of the Qing Dynasty. Reflecting on Empress Dowager Cixi's story and the fall of the Qing Dynasty, we are compelled to contemplate the true nature and responsibilities of power, how the choices of one individual can alter the course of history, and how such power can transform the fate of a community. Ultimately, history teaches us to consider how power should be wielded properly,